Okay, from the factory, display should be turned on as an application. This display portion of the tree view actually represents the display on the door of your G4. From the factory, you're going to have more than likely two displays turned on. The first one is going to be station, and under station, by default, I have my station ID, the date and time, charger, and battery voltage. And so if I go ahead and open up station, click on it, on the right hand side you can see my group file name is o1station.dg. my group description is station, so that's what you see over here on the left side is just the name station. Underneath you notice we have four displays turned on, so number of displays is 4. Include and scroll list means that when the display is scrolling through all of the options, if I were to choose no here, then you would not see any 4 of the choices underneath station scrolling in your list on the display. So with include scroll list yes turned on, then all 4 of these will have the opportunity to scroll on your display. And then allow keypad entry yes. So if your door on your G4 actually comes equipped with a keypad, then if this is set to yes, then you would be able to make some changes through the keypad there. If I wanted to add a variable, I would just increase the number of displays and then go in and modify that, and I'll show you how to do that. If I come down here to station ID and click on it, now I have an item setup tab, and under this I have the name of the display item, and in this case it's station ID, so that's what you see on the left there. The register, this is once again the app array register of the station ID, and so to show you that, I'm going to jump back up here to Totalflow, my station ID, and notice 0.0.4 is my station ID, which is Totalflow. And if I come back down to display and click on station ID, and I look at my station ID app array register, once again is 0.0.4. And so they went out, found the app array register of the station ID, plugged it into this item setup tab, and then from here it's going to display it on your screen on the display. Below that you have the display interval seconds, and so 3 seconds by default on this one. If you wanted to increase this, to 5 seconds or so, you would just change that to 5 and send it, and then your station ID will stay on the display for 2 seconds longer than it does by default. So you can see how you can change that and start to really manipulate the display. And if I come on down here under units, once we put in some things like static pressure and things like that, we can put in the units, so PSIA in inches of water. And if we come on down under the X location for units, I have 17 by default, 1 for the Y. And if I come on down to my data format, 17.17, and you'll see different numbers throughout, and you may have to play with this, but depending on how many placement holders you want after the decimal, so you may have 100 dot and then 4 decimal places, 2 decimal places, and so you can really change this to make the display look like you want it to look. And then come down to include and scroll list. So we saw that at the beginning under station, but now we're actually asked if we want to include this particular topic inside of station. So what that means is if I say include and scroll list no here, then the station ID doesn't show up in the station ID list, so it doesn't scroll on the display. Allow keypad, just the same, and then of course factory recall default, and then valid keypad entry. So what I'm going to do is come down to my AGA3-1 and go ahead and click on that. If I open it up, I should have 9 displays underneath, and so you can see I have tube 1 ID, my orifice diameter, static pressure, differential, temperature, flow rate, and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and increase 9 here to 11 and send that. Okay, and it is included in the scroll list, and the keypad is allowed. So I'm going to go ahead and open up AGA3-1, and if you notice down here at the bottom, now I have 10 and 11 are both added. So before we had 9, now we have 11. So I'm going to go ahead and click on spare, and this is more or less blanked out and ready for you to go ahead and put in whatever point that you want to show up on the display. So what we need to do is go find a couple of points that you want to add to the display. So I'm going to go up here to my I/O interface, and right here I have two analog inputs on the XFC G4, and so I'm going to write down the two app array registers for each one. So it's 7.4.3 for AI1 and 7.4.4 for AI2. So I'm going to drop down here to my first spare and put in 7.4.3, and this would be AI1. How long do you want it to stay on the display? Let's say we want it up there for 3 seconds. Units, maybe it's just a percent or whatever total. It might be an analog. I'm sorry, it might be a milliamp or something like that coming into your analog input. Everything else I could leave defaulted, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the send button here, and I'm going to reread, make sure everything stayed there. And so notice over here on the left my spare went to AI1, and then if we take a look at the display, we should have AI1 on the display. Okay, so I have 9 characters, decimal, and then 3 characters after that. If we wanted to shorten that up, we can change this format and make the display look the way you'd like it to look. And I'm going to jump down here to the spare number 2 and go ahead and put in AI2, and I'm going to put in 7.4.4, interval of maybe 3 seconds once again, and go ahead and send that. And once again, I'm going to hit the reread button, make sure it stayed there, and AI2 populates under my display. I'm going to take a look at the display screen physically on the door, and we have AI2 on the display. Okay, so on my display right now, AI2 is the negative 0.006 is actually on the display with AI2 above it, and then if I go back to AI1, I have the 0.006. So this could be tubing and casing pressure, for example, and you could add those to the display. The next thing to look at on the display is Annunciators. So if you click on Display, you have Setup and you have Annunciator tab. The Annunciators are the 8 boxes on the right side of your display, and if you don't know which one is A1, A2, A3, A4, here we have A1 through A8. And if you're curious about the layout of the 8 boxes, click the Help button. And so when you're looking at your display, A1 is in the top left, A8 is in the bottom right, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, top, bottom, top, bottom. You can see that here. A1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so I'm going to go ahead and close this. And right now, Totalflow is set up for A1. Application 31 is on A2, application 101 on A3, and so forth. My COM 2 is on A4, and so what this means is whenever you connect something up to your G4 on COM 2, in my case here, when it starts to communicate, you'll get certain annunciator icons. So if it's radio communication, you might get an antenna. If it's Modbus, you might get an arrow with a capital M or a lowercase m. And so you can look at your annunciators real fast and kind of use that as a troubleshooting thing to make sure that you are in fact communicating and working correctly. So I'm going to jump back over to Setup, and the last thing here on display programming would be the number of display groups. In my case right now I have 2, so if I wanted to add an entirely new group and then go into that group and add displays underneath, I would just up this 2 to 3, and then my station, and then AGA31, and then I'll get a new one. So let me show you that real quick. If I go ahead and up this to 3 and send it. Okay, then I'm going to come back over here to display and open that up, and you can see I have display group number 3. So when I was on display, I told it to give me 3 display groups, and so now I have station, AGA3-1, and then the new one here. So if I click on the new one, it asks how many display items do I want underneath. Right now the default is 2, so I can go ahead and open that up, and there's the 2 that it tossed in there automatically. I'm going to go back up to display and look at the scroll lock timeout. There's 2 app array registers directly above that. The first one is group scroll control, and the second one is item scroll control. And so what we can do is we can tie a button into one of your digital inputs and then take the app array register of that digital input, plug it into this particular spot, one of these two or both, and when I push the button, I can either scroll through the groups or I could scroll through the items. And so if we tied say digital input 1, we put a push button on it, we wired it to the digital input, and we put the push button on the outside of the box, then when you walk up to the box in the field and you push the button, it's going to scroll. In this case, if we put it on group scroll control, it's going to scroll between each group, so it would go station and then AGA 3-1 and then down to display group 3, and then I could let off and it would scroll through each individual display item underneath that particular group. If I put the push button here in my item scroll control, then what it's going to do is just open up everything in the list, and I'm going to go into station ID, I push it again, I go to date and time, I push it again, I go to charger voltage, I push it again, I go to battery voltage, and on down the list here. And when I let off, it's going to hold it for this lockout duration. So if I scroll down till I see static pressure and I let off, it's going to hold static pressure for 5 minutes, and then it's going to go back into just a standard scroll. Okay, and then keypad register enabled. Once again, if you had a keypad on your door, you would enable this and make sure the keypad's plugged in, and that would allow you to make changes from the keypad as opposed to a laptop. And so this concludes display programming on the G4.